Hi everyone! In this video I'm gonna talk about and somewhat explore the DPS healing hybrid build that you could go for, especially if you're playing a Druid or a Shaman. And this is something that I think would be more interesting to guilds that have both BWL and Molten Core on farm. And you know, you're gonna clear everything for like the 14th time next reset, and it's not that challenging, it's not that fun, you really just want to get your loot and get out of there. So what I mean is that you, for example as a Druid, could spend some fewer points in healing and some extra points in the balance tree. For example, I can equip my balance gear, which is pretty good I think, and go into Moonkin form, and this allows me not only to DPS, but also to boost the DPS of casters around me. And I mean, so far it's pretty obvious how it's gonna benefit you. You're gonna have more DPS on some fights. You might be arguing that you're gonna lose too much healing power, and partly, at least with the build I'm going, Tranquil Spirit is completely useless as I only heal with Rejuvenation, and that makes Nature Swiftness not too important. And if you have these raids on farm, you don't need that many oh shit buttons, because people shouldn't be making those mistakes anymore, and if they still are, then the solution is not to continuously save them over and over. The solution is that they step up their game a little bit, at least that's my opinion. So Nature Swiftness, not that important, often only leads to overhealing. Tranquil Spirit, useless for this build. Gift of Nature, this would be an increase, however it's a small increase. If I use my Rejuvenation, you can see that it ticks for 194, and I happen to know that one rank 4 Rejuvenation in total does 771 healing, and these 10% only affect the base value, so I would have been doing like 792 instead of 771 over the duration of 12 seconds, so it's an increase, but it's a very small increase, and I don't think it's really worth it compared to how much you're gaining by putting your talent points like this. If we look at Major Domo, for example, you can see that I performed very well as a balance druid, as a balance restoration druid, topping the charts. And this is not trying to brag, as I'm sure that there are many druids healing way better than I do. The point is that you can perform really well even in this build, at least if you're going for the type of build that I am, and since you still have the reduced casting time and Nature's Grace, you could probably perform really well if you were to use the Healing Touch build instead. And we're gonna look at some of our raid logs on the latest raid night that we had, just to look at where and when and why you'd want some of these hybrid players. So first of all, we're gonna look at all the encounters and trash fights just to get an idea of how good you can heal in this build. And apparently not, because I can't click it at all. Just a second. There we go. We pop over to healing, and as you can see, I managed to perform quite well, so you can't really argue that you would suffer too much, suffer too high a loss in terms of healing capabilities with this build, because clearly, and these are like Elliptic, Tuss, Vingballen, Marcy, Painkortan, Odog, Venom, all of those healers are really well geared. And then you could also argue that not all of these healers are raid healers, which would leave Tuss and Vingballen as something appropriate to compare against. And you could also argue that logs aren't a perfect measuring tool, and that's very true. They aren't a perfect measuring tool, but you still have to use something when you're trying to compare builds to see how they perform, and I think logs are the best tool we have, even though it's absolutely not perfect. So as you can see, it's absolutely possible to perform decently as a healer restoration druid in this build. Now, some fights of interest is going to be, for example, Ebon Rock and Flame Gore, and most of the fights in Molten Core, as many of them are not really that healing intense. If we look at the healing done on Ebon Rock, you should notice three things really. Notice the fight length, 1 minute 50 seconds. Very low healing done. Very high overhealing, you know, it's probably an average of 55% overhealing, meaning more than half of all the spells you were casting were useless, essentially. Kind of, a simplification. And very, very low overhealing. Players like Marcy, Venom, Tuss, Vingballen, they have pretty damn good gear, still insanely low healing done. Essentially, we have maybe 4 healers could heal this without any issues, meaning we have 6 players doing absolutely nothing. They're completely useless on this fight. So what if one of or more of these players were able to go Moonkin and deal some DPS, of course not topping the logs, but dealing some DPS, absolutely not zero, and boosting their other players. This would inevitably speed up the kill and thus speed up the raid. And then they could also farm a little bit outside of the raids, and they wouldn't have to pay for respecs all the time. It's the exact same on Flame Gore. It's quicker though, but still very low healing done, very high overhealing, quite low HPS. 4 healers without any issues could heal this. Yet another fight, which is a perfect example of why you'd actually be interested in having these kinds of healers. And whenever I pog Solgurub, which I have a pog for each reset, we usually go for 3, let's say, pure healers and then 2 hybrid healers. And for most of the fights, the hybrid healers just go DPS instead. We could look maybe at, I think Yeklik, I DPS stats. Obviously not that high, almost down at the bottom. But it's still another 16.5k DPS, another 16.5k damage done, another 200 DPS. And, people would have to step up their game pretty hard to have that increase otherwise if we didn't have the Boomkian in the raid. And obviously, I also buff the 4 mages as well with 3% extra crit. So you can compare, for example, some of the mages with my DPS, or maybe Warlock. Absolutely a difference, but still absolutely worth bringing. And then on, some fights where more healing is needed, for example on Mandok here, which we have there, I just go healer, I perform, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that healing done, and everything just works out great. And this is, it's essentially gonna speed up your raid by quite a bit in the end, and at least for me, it's gonna be funnier to play the game, because I can both DPS and heal. And when we look at, now we're gonna look some at which builds you could go for, in terms of talents. And I know for a fact that both Shamans and, there we have the Shaman build, let's see if we have a Druid build ready, there we go. Both Shamans and Druid can perform really well healing and pretty damn good DPS as well, especially Elemental Shamans actually. So if you're raid healing on a Shaman, which is what you should be doing if you are raiding, the only useful talents are Tidal Focus, Tidal Mastery, Purification, Nature Swiftness, and Mana Tide, really. You don't need Healing Way, you don't need Improved Healing Way. Huh, weird. And it's just not important talents. You can perform very well raid healing with this build. And you can perform some pretty damn good DPS with this build as well. This is actually, a very popular hybrid build for Shamans that wanna deal some elemental damage, because Nature Swiftness is a big deal, especially in PvP. But you could of course put the point in Elemental Mastery instead. Now, as I talked about the Druid, you could either go for a build like this, or you could quite possibly just go down here a little bit, maybe something like this, and then fill out this tree. And so you could either place your points with tanking in mind, in which case you would go for something like this. And this is actually a very popular healing build. You could go for, and now you can choose between Nature Swiftness or Leader of the Pack, and I would personally recommend Leader of the Pack, because this will allow you to give 3% spell crit to maybe 4 Fury Warriors or 3 Fury Warriors, and that's also a big deal. And you can also heal pretty good with this build. It's a very popular build for Druids, as you can both tank and heal. And especially now when raids are on farm, I think that these types of build are of more interest to any raid really, as you can speed up the entire run. And now I know that It's not the absolutely best healing build, but you don't need the absolutely best healing builds by now, because you're out geared like mad for the raids, you know. You're gonna clear Molten, I don't even know, Molten Core for the 30th time maybe, and Blackened Lair for the 14th, I think. You don't need that, you know, min-maxing at the talents level, because there are many much bigger factors that you can look into. For example, is everyone world buffed? Are people using consumables? Or are people even focusing on the pulls, you know? Those are really the big factors that you want to look into. So, to sum things up, this type of build is really only beneficial for your raid. For example, when we go Solgrub, I often go DPS on most builds, most fights. You can see here on Jeklik, Venoxis. On Marley I actually go healer for whatever reason. Mandorkir also, but then High Priestess the Call, Harlock, Hexer. It's really only on 2-3 fights that I have to go healer, that we really need 5 healers. And so what I can do on all those fights is, where we don't need healers, is to just go DPS. And like for example on a car, that's another 37k damage. It's a small difference, but it's absolutely noticeable, and you can still perform very well, so this should absolutely be of interest to you. So anyway, this was what I wanted to talk about. I hope you found it interesting, and like I said, if you want to clear the next raid just a little bit quicker, maybe 10 minutes in the end, which is still very noticeable in my opinion, then maybe have 3 or 4 healers go for this this hybrid build, as it will speed you up, and they will absolutely have the option to perform well on the healing shards. However, when Ankh-Rush comes around, it's probably gonna be a whole nother story, and then it would be reasonable to not have these hybrid builds, simply because you need so much healing on certain fights that you can't afford it. But we're not in Ankh-Rush right now. Most raiding guilds have them on farm. So I simply think it's time to open up for some of these hybrid players. I hope you found this interesting. Please like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more. I stream over at twitch.tv/NeceriumCloud, and link in the description. You can head over there to say hi or ask any questions. If you want to ask me any questions, that's the best place to do so. But with all this said, I hope you found it useful, and I will see you some other time. See ya!